Welcome. My name is Eugene Sepulveda. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Culturati, and we're really excited to be bringing three friends to a very important panel, AI in the future of work culture. To let you know a little bit about Culturati, we're a community of C-suite leaders, scholars, and investors who get the power of culture to drive corporate and employee success. We share our playbooks, we publish, commission, and disseminate research on culture. This topic, we've been polling our friends, what do you want to hear about? And couldn't think of three better people to bring from the local community. AI is going to put pressure on all of us to change the way we work. It's already putting pressure on us. Yes, it'll make all of us, our work more valuable, but in the interim, the time of transition investment that we must get past, and they may create some hardships. Managers must identify the jobs that we're going to replace and how we retrain, prepare our workforce for the new jobs. How do we maintain our sense of agency and responsibility for the output of this machinery? And I'm looking forward to Shaquille moderating this session, and I'll let him introduce both Chris and Brett. But first, just a little bit about Shaquille Rashid. We are partners and colleagues at Capital Factory. Shaquille has been writing about and investing in AI startups since 2014. He has been in the software business for more than 20 years at the forefront of all emerging technologies, from client server to web to cloud to the Internet of Things, an array of industries from including finance, telecom, service providers, pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, advertising, oil and gas. He's currently a partner and on the board of advisors at Capital Factory. His first investment with Capital Factory was a healthcare startup about improving patient experience and using AI, natural language processing, a Series A that was led with Live Oak. Shaquille, when was that? Like 2014, 2015?
2014, 2015, yeah.
So he's been playing in this space for a very long time. I'm going to go back into the background. Thank you guys for being, I'll just say one thing. I'll say that, while Shaquille is kind of the intellectual lighthouse at Capital Factory, Brett is the godfather of Culturati. For a very long time, he's been leading with culture to improve the experience and performance of the employees. And Chris, I've long called the Buddhist high priest. He's been touched by and inspired by the power of diversity and inclusion and privilege. And Chris walks the talk. So it's our privilege to have you guys. Thank you.
Eugene, thank you. You had me at hello, and I'll never refer any other way to Chris Hyams again.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. Both Brett and Chris need no introduction, especially in Austin, and I'm sure it's beyond that also. But I will just do a quick intro, and then we can get into the actual discussion. We have an hour, so I want to get as much out of both of them more than anything else. Brett Hurt is the CEO, co-founder of Data.World, a public benefit company, and that's part of what we talked about, the culture piece. Data.World is a platform for modern data teamwork and world's largest collaborative data community. In 2017, 2018, 2019, Data.World was honored as Best of the World list by B Lab, placing the company in the top 10% of all B Corps globally. Brett is also the co-owner of Hurt Family Investments, along with his wife, Deborah. They have invested in several startups, several that I know of that are doing really well, 21 VC funds and multiple philanthropic endeavors here. In 2017, Brett was given the Best CEO Legacy Award by Austin Business Journal. Brett began programming at age 7 and doing so on the internet at the age 18. Brett has recently finished his free book, The Entrepreneur's Essentials. The link for that will be given out. When we wanted to talk about this topic, Brett was one of the first people that I wanted to talk about this whole area, Brett is a native Austinite, serial entrepreneur. He has done 3 companies, not 1, not 2, 3 companies, starting with Core Metrics, Bazaar Voice, and Data.World, all working in the realm of data, voice of customer, startups, sales, marketing, growth, everything. And Brett is one of the pillars of the Austin startup environment that I know. He's an avid TED enthusiast, where several influential people have talked about AI and its implications since a pretty long time. And some little known facts about business, right? Brett is not all business. He has a record on doing planks and strength training. You can see that from his blog. On the spiritual side, I've spent a lot of time talking to him about very different topics, including Vedanta, which I was really surprised that he was into when I started talking to him about it. And he shares his thoughts on the blog, and we will actually put those links for you. And you can follow it up. If anybody is thinking about doing a startup, the Entrepreneur's Essential is essential reading for them. Absolutely. Brett, did you want to add anything to that before I jump into Chris's?
If I say anything at this point, it's just going to be bad. No, so I appreciate it, Shaquille. I really appreciate our friendship, and a real honor to do this with you and Chris. It's a very, very important time to have this discussion.
Excellent. And Chris, I first met Chris when he was doing B-Side, which is the previous startups before he joined Indeed as their VP of product. Chris is Chief Executive Officer and Board Director of Indeed. Everybody should be familiar about Indeed. Chris joined Indeed in 2010 as Vice President of Product, responsible for technology, strategy, and innovation. And in 2015, Chris became the president, assuming additional responsibilities for Indeed's revenue growth and client success. Chris was appointed Indeed CEO in April 2019, about a year before COVID, leading Indeed's mission to help people get jobs. Before Indeed, Chris was the co-founder of B-Side, a technology platform on independent film analytics, marketing, and distribution. Prior to B-Side, he was vice president of engineering at Trilogy Software, which all 3 of us go back to. Chris holds a master's in computer science from Rice University and AB in architecture from Princeton. And like I said, the why part of who better to talk to about what is happening around the jobs than the CEO of world's #1 jobs board. Indeed also runs hiringlab.org, which creates innovative data insights on global market that inspire new conversations about the state of work by a team of leading economists who provide thought leadership on global labor markets, including hiring trends, salary information, popular skills, and employer benefits. He shares his current reading list, which is really very interesting. I've been going through it myself. He and his wife have been very thoughtful supporters of several nonprofits and worthy causes. I sit on one of the boards with his wife. And the best description of Chris, apart from what Eugene said, I heard during South by Southwest interviewed by Ellen McGirt, where she called him the philosopher CEO. Used to be philosopher king was the biggest thing anybody could say. I think now it's the philosopher CEO. So I couldn't agree more. Again, we'll provide the link to that also going forward. So Chris, if you want to add anything to that, then we'll jump straight into the questions.
That's too much already. Let's start talking about AI here.
Excellent. So we were just starting to talk about this before our call, and the key thing seems to be we all have been involved with some AI, machine learning for a few years now, or even going back all the way to expert systems back in the 90s, right? But seems like the recent developments in AI, especially in the term generative AI, and has really generated a lot of excitement around it. right? What is it? What's the reason behind this excitement that you see in terms of generative AI?
I mean, as a technologist and someone who has really been infatuated with technology since I was a kid, grew up reading sci-fi like a lot of tech entrepreneurs. To me, this is an incredibly foundational moment in the history of the world. And it's one that builds on the many layers that have come before it, starting with the invention of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee inventing, HTTP, HTML, the web being open and so accessible, and having the ability to then train on this content. And what you're seeing is a moment in history where it's a reflection of us. It's a reflection of our content, the collection of some of the best content put out by humanity. And the reason it's generating so much interest is because it works so incredibly well. AI has been a promise for a long, long time, and nobody, I think, anticipated that large language models were ultimately going to be the breakthrough that we needed. And technology is something where it's always seeking productivity, it's always seeking efficiency. And the fact that, when ChatGPT first came out, copywriting jobs in a controlled study, that was managed by MIT, saw over a 30% productivity. When we did our own programming test, early on with this trend at data.world, which we have some of the world's best programmers here, we saw a 30% increase in productivity in 1 week. Is absolutely stunning. Those types of productivity gains in such a short period of time have almost never happened in human history. So I'm extremely bullish on it, and it's getting that level of excitement because it's built on top of all of these things that have come before, and it's finally snapped them together. Not unlike, the iPhone when it came along was really built on top of so many other things that had come before it, but it just snapped them together in a really beautiful way. So it's an incredibly exciting time in the history of technology, and I think will mark 2023, or maybe if you want to say 2022, since it came out at the end of 2022, as one of the most profound shifts in the history of humanity and technology. And so I'm all in on this trend at data.world, and also as an angel investor in so many startups and VC funds.
I think it is really fascinating to see how spectacular the response from people has been. AI has been around for a long time. It drives much of our lives. Anyone who talks to Siri or Alexa or the Google Assistant, or who browses movies on Netflix, or to me, full self-driving is an extraordinary achievement. But there's something about ChatGPT, and I think there's a few things that are just different about it. Number one, for those that don't know anything about the history of artificial intelligence or computer science, the Turing test, like this, was designed to freak people out because it sounds like a person. It's the first thing that any of us have actually been able to interact with, where you see something that mimics our one definition of human intelligence. And we can argue about, is it intelligent or not, but it certainly feels that way, very differently than vision AI being able to properly identify objects, even though that's really amazing. I think the second thing is that certainly for those of us, and indeed, we're sort of a snapshot of the global economy. So we think about everyone and every type of job. 60% of the world has been thinking about automation potentially replacing their jobs. I think this is the first time that most folks who are in what we would call the sort of knowledge worker economy suddenly see something that hopefully everyone is thinking, wow, there's a whole bunch that I do that something like this might be able to do better. So I think it's kind of captured some imagination there. But actually, I think the biggest thing, what's different about this from any other, AI is everywhere in our lives. This is the only thing that I'm aware of where we can all just sit down and play with AI. So the fact that anyone can sit down and just poke at the edges of it, and what can it do over here? What does it know about this? Can it do my meal prep for me, which the answer is yes, or create my grocery list, or can it read and summarize these PDFs and these articles for me? Or like anyone can sit down and just ask questions and have a direct one-on-one interaction with AI. And to me, that's the leap from all the science fiction that we've been reading to, oh, here's a thing and I can play with it. It's not a robot that's going up and down a flight of stairs. This is me talking to a machine. And there's, it's not surprising that that has completely captured, I think, everyone's imagination.
And it's not just talking to a machine, it's talking to a machine that's trained on all content from, many centuries, right? So that's the thing that's so fascinating is, if you wrote a sci-fi book, you couldn't make this up better. And you said, you've invented an artificial intelligence that's trained on all human content. What would you ask it? What would you want to know? How would you prompt it? And we're figuring all of that out right now. And it's just incredibly exciting.
It is, yeah. So since things are going so fast, what are your go-to resources to keep updated on these latest developments? I would love to know, because I keep going to like thousands of places right now. So
yeah, for me, I really love following Ethan Mollick. He's a Wharton professor. I'm a proud Wharton grad, and he is actually younger than me, so we didn't overlap while he, once he became a professor, I'd already graduated. But he's really pushing the boundaries, and he's got a great newsletter. He's always sharing a lot of tips. We also added Rachel Woods to our advisory board recently. It's interesting because she started out with us as an intern many years ago and left Data.World to pursue her own business. And now she's the founder of the AI Exchange, which is incredibly well populated with lots of examples of what's happening, a lot of trends, a lot of great, prompt ideas. So I'd encourage people to follow the AI Exchange as well. I also read Hoffman's podcast, Possible. He recently had Ethan Mollick on, which I was happy to see that he actually knew who he was. And, Reid Hoffman was talking about the fact that actually Ethan Mollick is the #1 person that he follows. And I was very happy to hear that, because I feel like he's coming out with the best content. He's really been pushing teachers to embrace this. And it's very interesting reactions, from both companies, teachers, and others. Some people are just like, shut it down. Others are, this is amazing. And it's kind of all over the map. But he's really pioneering that, look, this is a natural evolution and you must embrace it, just like we've embraced productivity tools in the past. And if you don't, you're just going to be left behind, including if you're a teacher. So he's really leading in academia in this area.
definitely follow Ethan Mollick myself too. Great guy, definitely. So, Chris, how about you?
Well, so I hate to admit that a lot of what I get is actually coming from AI. So it's like my Google and YouTube feeds, because I've been searching and reading so much, like everything that's getting thrown at me is about this. So I do discover a lot of stuff that way. But the folks that I follow, I think we're going to get into this later in the conversation. I have a lot of concerns about fairness and ethics and the sort of whole world of how these systems are built and who's building them and the biases that get baked into them. So I follow on Twitter a handful of practitioners, and explicitly I'm interested in marginalized voices. So women and people of color, people like Timnit Gebru or Margaret Mitchell, both of whom were fired from Google. There's an amazing professor at UCLA called Safia Noble, who I had on my podcast a couple months ago, who wrote this book called Algorithms of Oppression, which is all about racism being encoded in search engines, but also her research is now on AI. And then actually outside of technology thinkers like Yuval Noah Harari has written some really amazing stuff about this, and Ted Chiang, who's a science fiction author, my favorite science fiction author, has been writing for the New Yorker, and he just had a piece that we might get to later last month that's really extraordinary about. And I think that, we think about science fiction writers, their job is to imagine what the shifts in technology mean to society. And so that's stuff that I'm interested in, is what are the societal implications of this. Also, Ibram Kendi, who I also had on my podcast last month, has been talking a whole lot about the sort of unequal distribution of the impacts of changes like this. And then the last one is, I spent a lot of time with our own team. So we've got 300 folks working in this field within the company, and many come from academia, many come from a lot of these other places. So I'm just meeting multiple times a week with them, and I'm learning so much from just the work that they're doing every day. And so I'm probably getting the best unfiltered information directly from them.
Actually, the first ML user group meetings I attended were at Indeed. So it's you guys have been doing that for some time. I believe it was like even 2015 or so that I started coming to some of those. So that's, yeah, I think some of the people have asked for Chris's suggestions. So hopefully I can get all of those.
Oh, sure.
And pass them later on in terms of this. On Harari, of course, he has been doing a great job of passing information and making people think beyond what some of the implications that most people from business or corporate are thinking about in terms of this. So excellent. So overall, I'm putting, and I want to make sure that we have this, right? Looks like Brett is really optimistic all in on this. Chris, I'm getting you are somewhere in between, where you see a lot of optimism plus some concerns. Would that be the right way to put you in that? Or
yeah, so I would say that I am. I don't think it's reasonable to say that's like there's a continuum and I'm on one end or the other. I am sort of at both ends at the same time. I'm at both extremes. I'm incredibly excited and hopeful about the amazing advancements that can come from this. I agree with Brett. I think that. And again, AI has been around for a long time, so I'm not talking just about LLMs. That's a particular innovation that I think has brought a lot of interest and attention and is something new. But AI, I think, is like the internet. I think that anyone who, 30 years ago was saying, like, I don't really buy this internet thing and it's not going to affect me or my business, like, AI is exactly the same. It's that big. And I am deeply concerned about the present and certain future problems around bias and fairness, and particularly around consolidation of power and wealth, which is what Chang's most recent article is really amazing on. And then, of course, like anyone who has read enough of this stuff, I fear the robot apocalypse as well. But like, I'm much more concerned about the next 5 to 20 year stuff around bias and consolidation of power that I think are very, very real.
excellent.
One thing I would say is I think, Chris, you're right to point it out. Like, we've got to think about like how to make this a great equalizer. And one of the books that I absolutely love when it comes to inequality is Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, especially the inequality chapter about what's really happening data-wise. But one of the talks that, it was the most important talk I saw at TED this year by Saul Khan, the inventor of Khan Academy,
Yep.
is the one where he's really, he got early access, Khan's a nonprofit. Obviously, he's really focused on helping students all over the world. He got early access for GPT-4 back in August, built around that, and built essentially, if people are familiar with The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson, a great sci-fi book, he built a version of kind of the Diamond Age in the form of a virtual tutor that both students and teachers get access to for free. And the demo, I would really encourage people to watch that talk. If you're not live on this, just go to TED.com, search for Saul Khan, you'll find it. It's his latest talk. But it really blew my mind in terms of equality. Like, I have the means, and Chris, you have the means, a lot of people watching this have the means to hire like private tutors, things like that for my children. But not everybody does, and there's a compounding value in their lives, like in terms of earnings potential, which schools they get into, everything. It like compounds over and over and over again. And it all starts with education. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on it, is that if we start there and we start with tools that are just so profoundly great at tutoring students, regardless of, obviously they need to have good internet access, but regardless of their financial means, it could be just such an equalizer. And so anyways, I would highly encourage people to watch that talk, but I definitely agree with Chris that we have to be very mindful about access here, and about you really trying to push this technology in a way where it benefits the maximum number of people in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So he's built the young ladies illustrated primer. Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, I mean, it's not just for young ladies, for young men too. But yeah, if you watch that talk, it really blew my mind. I just thought, oh my gosh, every child is going to have the best tutor that you could even think of, like that money really could not even buy, because this tutor has access. It's trained on all human knowledge, right? And the way it prompts them and takes them through exercises, doesn't give them the answer, gets them to really think for themselves, is just incredible.
Yeah. So this is where things get interesting, though, in terms of when I had a chance to talk to Ibram Kendi about this, which was an extraordinary opportunity. One of the things that he said that, again, someone who's outside of the field, that really hit me. He said that the greatest danger of AI is this supposition that it's actually artificial, that humans did not create it. And so we could say it's trained on the world's knowledge, but it's not trained on the world's knowledge. It's trained on recorded information that has been published on the internet, that based on a whole bunch of other things, we have made some assumptions about the authority of, which we know is actually not representative of human history. And it has an incredibly deep Western white male bias to it. And so if we just think, well, this is what the AI came up with, we trained this, and here's the information, and here's how we're going to educate people, we're abdicating our own responsibility for all of the decisions that went into that information, how it was organized, how the models were built and trained. And if we're not thinking about that stuff right now, so this is where I'm like all in on the positive, and I'm super all in on the, we have to be like, this is, I've said this a couple times before, and people say that it's hyperbole, but this is like Oppenheimer here, right? I mean, he, in terms of the power for good and the power to massively consolidate and ossify a set of, Western patriarchal ideas at a massively global scale that will, in a personalized way, get a whole bunch of people to think and believe a set of things that, if we're not thinking, like, again, that's, I'm more worried about that than us turning into the Matrix. Like, that might happen if strong AI and AGI come to pass, but I'm really worried about this stuff in the next 3 to 5 years, unless we actually all get together and say, we have to collectively stop using the language that those of us in technology use, and say that, you're slowing down innovation by talking about this stuff. Like, yes, I think we need to slow down innovation and have real conversations about, because this stuff is so unbelievably powerful and amazing.
I'm gonna come back to this discussion again, because there's a slide that talks exactly on those points, and then we can get into more details. I want to cover a few things on the startup landscape for AI, and then get into more about jobs and everything else. So, Brett, you've been investing in this area. What implications do you see in the startup landscape? And what advice do you give founders regarding leveraging AI in their startups?
Well, so I was actually on the Austin Next podcast discussing this recently with Worley, and I think that this is going to create a massive boom in the number of startups. And the reason why is that, and we've actually had a historic number of startups created in the last 3 years, believe it or not. Even during the worst part of the pandemic, maybe this is easily believable because so many people lost jobs in 2020, but there were more startups created in 2020 than at any other point in US history. And then there were more in 2021 than at any other point in US history. And Zen Business here in Austin has been a great beneficiary of that. They've grown really well. They're valued at 1.7 billion now. We were early investors there, and Ross Bordorf is a great CEO who just won Entrepreneur of the Year. So that this is a really big trend overall towards more and more startup creation, which is ultimately the job engine. I mean, Indeed started out, with Ronnie, and Chris got involved very early on, and look at how many jobs Indeed has created, not just because of what it does as a company, but I'm talking about at Indeed, proper, well over 10,000 jobs. And so all companies start out that way, and generative AI allows the startup cost to fall very significantly. Like if you're starting a business today in tech, of course, you're going to just start from the beginning using things like GitHub Copilot. There's just no doubt about it, because it's going to give you a massive advantage in terms of your coding speed. And every investor would be asking you too, if you weren't using it, well, we're stuck in our old ways. And it's like, no, that's not the right answer, right? You should always be seeking the most productive tools so that you can go faster and do more with less. And doing more with less is kind of the definition of the startup mindset. And the tools that we create at Data.World are all about doing more than less. And that is the arc of all technology history, is about seeking more and more efficiency. And capitalism overall is all about seeking more and more efficiency. And as a result, the world has been primarily almost completely lifted out of starvation. If you look at just the last 100 years of data, it's a massive increase in just prosperity in the world. And that doesn't mean we don't have big inequality still in the world. But overall, humanity is on this amazing kind of evolutionary curve. And so in terms of startup land, I'm seeing some incredibly compelling pitches with generative AI at the core of it. I saw one recently, which really blew my mind, where it was a 3D avatar that looked very real, that you could apply to almost any type of scenario, like a virtual salesperson, virtual call center rep, a D&D dungeon master. And you conversed with it the same way you would converse with ChatGPT, but it was tuned for that context. And it was one of those moments where it literally just made my brain kind of explode, because although that's so easy for me to tell you about, when you actually see it, it's kind of like that iPhone moment where when you Chris said earlier that it feels like you're interacting with something with intelligence, almost like a human being. But when you actually see a 3D avatar on your screen and you're talking with it and it's talking back to you with the mannerisms of a character, and you can tell it's not real, right? But it's so compelling, and it just, I was like, oh my gosh, this company is going to have so many vectors of revenue. We're applying it across everything we do for our customers at Data.World, like just being able to easily document data, easily query data, easily document queries, easily be able to discover data inside of your company. So we're all in on it for the benefit of our customers. And the one that's the furthest along on that with us is WPP, which is in the top three. They're the world's largest advertising conglomerate. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. Snowflake just had their summit about 2-3 weeks ago, and had hundreds and hundreds of startups that all were talking about generative AI, and they were on stage with NVIDIA. So this is
They had like
the
600 plus or something like that. In that
yeah, I mean, this is the trend right now, and it's really really exciting, and it's going to be at the center of all tech startups in one way or another. And then some tech startups directly will be focused just exclusively on this, like that one that I mentioned with 3D virtual avatars. So it's an incredibly exciting time for innovation. And I think the net result is we're going to have an absolute boom in the number of startups, because your ability to dream and come up with something new is now much less limited, because you have a superpower kind of intelligence working alongside you and your team. And just like the internet led to a massive productivity boom and number of startups, this is a turbocharger on top of that is only possible because the internet and the web came before, as we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly exciting time on that front.
So
Definitely there will be lots of failures, just like there were at the beginning of mobile, or the beginning of the internet. I remember the .com bust like it was yesterday. It almost put Core Metrics out of business, as we went from 100 customers down to 3, because 97 of our customers went out of business. So there will be things like that, shocks to the system, but overall, it's going to be the most massive accelerant for, I think, startup creation, which will then lead to job creation. Even if the number of jobs is smaller for each startup, because the productivity is so much higher for coding and content creation overall.
I'll ask one quick follow-up on that, right? Your company, data.world, really plays a very important role, because data is central to all of learning and everything else. How are you seeing any particular issues in terms of licensing or privacy implications from data? And if you want to talk from data.world perspective, that would be great.
So it's a really important question. Even our own internal use, we make sure that we're doing this in a way where we're not disclosing customer data, we're not disclosing things that are proprietary. So that's something that you really need to train on. And later on in this, I'd like to show a screen of an internal tool that we've developed, showing kind of the best of AI hacks to really inspire our team members. And their customers on a wide spectrum here. There are some customers who are, I don't want to have anything to do with it right now because it's just too scary. And there are other customers who are saying, it's not going to be OpenAI for me, but it's going to be a private large language model that I really control and I know doesn't have access, and I'm not training to benefit others. It's just benefiting my company. And then there's some that are just all in right now, like WPP is with OpenAI. So it's going to be a wide spectrum, and you do have to be mindful of the legal implications here, protecting your code, things of that nature. But all of those things
you should be able to share something if you want, Brett. So on the screen.
Yeah, I'll just share this really quickly. Show this. So this is something that David Galindo on our team, on our employee experience team, has been working with Matt Lessig, who's my co-founder and our COO. And essentially, you can see Brian, our CTO here, who Chris knows well, showing how you can take a Loom video and then just automatically summarize it very easily, so that you don't have to watch 60 minutes. You can just summarize it and watch, 5 minutes. And it just goes through a number of examples to really inspire people that different people have shared here, how to prompt in ChatGPT with these quote unquote golden prompts, how to do software development in GitHub. And, that was put out there by Dave Griffith. So this goes through a lot of examples. This is how to use it for data.world virtualization and really show, the semantic data federation, the kind of graph of how data connects to each other, and do that in an automated way. So this is just one of many examples of how we're doing things internally to inspire people. And it may seem like that a company like Data.World, because we were built with AI in mind from the beginning. Literally, when we were a year old, we were talking about the future of AI will be built on well-documented, well-understood data. We're built on what's called a knowledge graph, which is the ideal platform for AI to operate on top of. So this is kind of a moment for us. But even with Data.World, we have to push our own team to change their ways because this is all so new. And people have well-worn ways of coding and well-worn ways of content creation. And it's similar to how teachers are going to have to push their students. Like the thing I love about Ethan Mollick as a professor at Wharton is he's getting his students to think 10x more ambitiously about what kind of assignments they can complete because of this superpower they have. Like very similar to the invention of the digital calculator, which a lot of universities banned. Some of them banned it for 10 years after it came out, said, this is going to ruin mathematics. You've got to do it by hand. And we all know where that went. It went to much more ambitious assignments that you could ultimately get done in mathematics because you had this superpower. So even at Data.World, we have to push our own team to embrace this and learn new skills and be world-class with it and follow people like Ethan Mollick and follow people like Rachel Woods and learn new skills. Or frankly, like if we don't do that, as people with jobs in tech, we're going to be obsolete if we don't. I mean, it's really that simple. It would literally be like being a mathematician and never embracing digital, the digital age. So it's something that is a superpower that you must learn how to be world-class with. And you've got to be mindful about the fact that it can hallucinate and you have to error check it, and you can't be like that lawyer that produced his brief for the case, and then the judge was like, none of these cases actually exist, and he almost got disbarred for it. So there will be things like that happen along the way. You have to be smart in terms of error checking and everything else, but it is the world's biggest, Chris, you compared it to Oppenheimer. I mean, it's the world's biggest superpower in decades and building on top of all that came before it.
Chris, what kind of adoption that you have within Indeed also for these type of tools? You were mentioning something before during our discussion too.
Yeah, I mean, so we're building sort of everything with that in mind. That AI has been the foundation of how we match. I mean, we have 300 million job seekers that come to Indeed with 25 million jobs, and matching has been at the core of the business from the very, very start. We started with a very small team. We've got about 300 folks doing this type of work now. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing is how we're building and reimagining every aspect of the Indeed experience. But we do have our engineering team is using, we don't use Copilot. I think we're using Cody, but people have been experimenting with all of these different platforms and have been, it's been really amazing. In particular for, we just went through a pretty sizable reorganization of our R&D teams, and for people to get up to speed on a new code base. And anytime you have a bunch of things going on in your business, you have people moving around all the time. So that's been extraordinarily helpful. I mentioned we're doing a pilot. So I can just speak from a couple months of playing with this, a product called Glean, which we initially got really just to be a better way to search for information. So it plugs into our intranet, our wiki, our code bases, our HR systems, and just does a better job of you being able to ask a question, and it just shows you where you can find all the information. But they have a generative AI chat feature right now where you can then just go ask questions like, what does Shaquille do here? And it'll go through and pull all this information and give you a nice 3-paragraph summary of when the person started, with the projects that they work on, their areas of expertise. And then you can actually just ask it questions about how do I do X, or where do I find information about this? And then we can train it. So, we you ask it questions about a PO, which for us is a positive outcome. That's when someone applies to a job and hears something back, and it thinks it's a purchase order, and you say, well, actually, this is what a positive outcome is. And then in the future, you can ask questions, and it'll tell you where to find information. And it's been I'm pretty confident that there will be massive gains, especially in the people in a large organization just understanding what's going on and how to get information, which the bigger the company gets, the more complicated that becomes. It just becomes so hard to get answers to anything. And so we're super bullish on the ability to solve these problems. And that is, just for clarity though, that's not like replacing anyone's job. That's just making it so much easier for all the people who are there to try to do the stuff that they're already doing.
Adding to that. So like Shopify just announced a chatbot for all of their vendors to be able to get the easiest information. So I'm assuming something like that would come through for Indeed, for job applications, for enterprises who are posting jobs and everything else also. So hoping for that. So we'll shift gears here a little bit and then get into this topic about how do you think this technology affects the job market? A few people were asking on the panel too, and this is a graphic that I picked up from World Economic Forum in terms of all the types of jobs that they think in terms of exposed to automation by AI. And you definitely have a lot of data around this, I'm sure. So would love to hear your thoughts, Chris.
Yeah, so technology has had an impact on jobs for as long as people have gotten paid for work, and so I'm anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen is making stuff up. So I'll share everything as my opinion. If you look back historically, I think over the long arc, technology has been primarily a benefit. Brett talked about there's fewer people clearly living in hunger today, but as a society, we work fewer hours in less dangerous environments. We have better protection for workers. All of those things are true. At the same time, since 1950, worker productivity is up about 250%. Compensation is up only about 115%. And if you look from 1950 up till about 1973, they moved in lockstep. And since 1973, when a lot of automation started kicking into high gear, there's been just a massive split. So compensation take home has basically been stagnant for the last 40 years, and productivity has continued to go up. So the gains of these technological advances are going to a smaller group of folks at the top, which has led to a widening of the wealth gap and more inequity. So these are the things that as Indeed, we think about and we worry about. And so, I've talked a lot about the fact that as technologists, I think we all have to apologize for our use of the word disruption. So we talk about disruption. Every single VC pitch is we're going to disrupt X, Y or Z industry, which is great because things are messy and need to be improved. But that disruption, the collateral damage is people, and these cycles of disruption happen faster and faster, and AI is going to make that happen even faster. So I think in terms of where the impact is going to happen, the difference with what sort of we're seeing now with generative AI is, as opposed to automation, which was much more potentially a threat to lower wage and particularly sort of manual labor. The ways to think about where it's going to happen first is the combination of where the cost of getting it wrong is very high. So like food service and hospitality, the cost of getting it wrong is very low. Where is it high? In law, in medical diagnostics, in financial modeling. So those are areas where the difference between getting it right and a human being possibly messing up, like there's trillions of dollars at stake. So that's an area to go after because it's worth the cost and effort. And then like, where will the replacement start? Probably not in law and medical diagnostics because there's a whole lot of regulation. Like those will happen. But as Brett said, there's already a lot of examples of that thing being a problem. Whereas customer service or marketing, like we're already seeing that today. It's anecdotal. So our data says it's not happening yet. The only place that we're actually seeing, and we're going to publish our hiring lab, which you mentioned early on, is a free resource of just our economists looking at all of the publicly available economics data and then layering our own data, our view of the supply and demand at a very granular level on top of it. Marketing, for example, marketing and software jobs are down a lot this year because those are the ones that grew the most during the pandemic. But in particular, content creator and copywriter jobs are down about 40% in the last year, where overall marketing jobs are down about 17%. So there's a noticeable statistical difference in that area. Those are the first early signs of things, because every marketing department is just seeing like, yeah, we don't have to necessarily have entry-level people doing this work. The question that I ask, though, around that, and I talked about this with our CMO when GPT 3.5 came out, is sure, we can, any company can replace entry-level copywriters with that, but who are the people who are then guiding that work, who are giving the prompts and evaluating which output is best? Those are people who are seasoned, experienced marketers. How did they get to be that way? They started out with a crap entry-level job writing bad marketing copy. And if 20 years from now, no one is taking those crap jobs to like cut your teeth on doing doing all of that stuff, are we going to produce great marketers in the future who haven't done that? And maybe it is the calculator thing, and maybe, yeah, it's just going to free everyone up from it. But I think it's hard to imagine how people who just leap over some of the fundamentals what they will bring to these occupations in the future. So I think those are really sort of these are the kind of questions that we're wrestling with.
One bifurcation, just to pile onto what Chris just said, between the digital calculator analogy. So I'll play devil's advocate on the example I gave. Digital calculator was always accurate. This will sometimes produce content that's incorrect. So you do need to fact check this content, and I think that's going to serve as a bit of a ceiling on, like coding, for example. You need to make sure that the code that you develop in GitHub Copilot is really secure, like doesn't have a bunch of security flaws, and is really performant. And there's a lot of skill still required for content creation, coding, et cetera, to make sure that it's good, that it's accurate. And that is a difference from the digital calculator analogy that I gave.
Well, and let me just add one more thing to it.
Don't hallucinate, right?
Yeah. So I think that's an amazing point. But let me add one more thing, which is that Paul Graham, I think at one point on Twitter, in some argument that someone was having over a different thing, said there's no such thing as good writers, just good thinkers. And then there's a whole bunch of linguistic theory, and Ted Chiang has written actually short stories about this, about that language, development of language is part of the development of thinking. And that if we have a tool that does language for us, and so all these people are saying, well, engineers are terrible writers, so ChatGPT is amazing because you can just like spit some stuff out and then clear prose will come out of the other end. If people don't have to learn how to write and think and communicate, I have concerns about our ability to actually think and reason through and make important decisions, like what is the data that we're going to use to train this on? What are the things that we need to look out for? So I hope that people don't stop writing as a result of this.
Agreed. I'm more bullish on that they won't, and for lots of reasons, like the error rate I just cited, but again, Ethan Mollick's really good person to look to for this, and how is he preparing this generation of students for this inevitable productivity lift, like this superpower that if they don't embrace, they're going to be very, they're going to be kind of obsolete. I mean, they're not going to be well prepared for the job market.
So what advice do you have for new graduates or mid-career professionals on this in terms of this changing landscape? What would you tell them? Like, I got a text from my daughter who's listening to this saying, marketing jobs are going away.
Well, so marketing, so I don't think that whole fields are going away. first of all, in that I think that there will be lawyers who use AI and lawyers who don't, and doctors who use AI and marketers who use AI, and like the ones who don't, their jobs are going to go away in the same way that the people who said this internet thing is a fad ended up on the wrong side of that. I think young people have an inherent advantage. If you look back on the internet, who were the people that were having the biggest impact? It was the 21-year-olds who weren't thinking about the way things always were and had just sort of grown up as digital natives. But mostly, I think the most important thing is being open to consistent change. And I know that the older I get, I like to think of myself as someone who embraces radical change, but like I probably less so than I was when I was in my 30s or in my 20s. And anyone, certainly in a knowledge worker field, needs to expect to learn new things and to adapt. And so I'll just say this, that like one of the things when I'm thinking about education and when people ask me, what should I study in school? I had a chance to give a talk at Rice University where I did my graduate studies for the 35th anniversary of the CS department. And part of the thesis of my talk was that CS majors should be required to study ethics and history and literature, and that what we actually need in technology is sort of an equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath. And while there's a whole history of like what that actually means, it's sort of just a thing that they say at the very end. But there's this idea baked into it that, you know, as a practitioner in the medical field, you're treating a patient as a human and not a disease. And it actually includes things like you have to respect the privacy and not be afraid to admit when you don't know something. And these are all things that engineers are terrible at by default. And so I think it's really important that people understand history and philosophy and ethics and read literature if they're going to be creating tools like this because of the impact on humans.
By the way, Chris, I would say that is true for all business people too. Not just
that is probably true. Yes.
That's just period. The best class I actually took at Wharton was my business ethics class. That was probably my favorite class. But, you know, to answer your question, Shaquille, I think, you know, the ability to be adaptable is the most important ability we have going forward, and to constantly be re-upping our skill set and not being afraid of learning new technologies. And so I would actually pose that if you're at a college and you're in a CS class, or you're in a marketing class, and they are not using this technology already and training you on this technology in this fall, you're probably at the wrong school. Like you need to be at a school where the teachers are very adaptable to these types of superpowers and not fighting them and giving people Fs because they think it was generated by ChatGPT or whatnot. There's lots of ways around that Ethan Mollick has talked about in terms of making sure people actually are retaining their writing skills and are actually retaining their critical thinking skills. And again, he's my favorite to follow on this front, because education is being reinvented right in front of us, starting with what Khan Academy just did. So this is it's really important for people listening to this to jump in, start using it, be aware of its limitations, of course, and start, you know, really becoming world-class personally at using this, because this is inevitable in terms of the productivity lift it's going to give, and people are going to ask you, you know, if they're looking at hiring you, they're going to ask you, like, give me some examples of how you're using AI to do your job more efficiently and more effectively. And you need to have those examples, or you're going to not be prepared in the workforce.
Hey, Chris, we just have a minute left. Actually, there's so much more that we needed to talk about, especially the topic that you had brought up earlier in terms of regulations and everything else. But would you like to close this with some thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize kind of what I was saying before, that there's not an either or here. You don't have to be pro or against that. And in fact, if you care deeply about something, it's really important to inquire very, very deeply about the implications of it. And we all believe that this is the most powerful and important invention of our lifetimes. And as a result, it deserves the care and attention to make sure that we get it right. So that impact is going to make people's lives better, as opposed to just making a handful of people much richer, which it certainly will do. I think it can do both. And so that is my hope, that we don't look at this as an either or, you're for it or against it, but that we can embrace that. And the best thing that we can do to make it successful is to look at what the challenges are.
Excellent.
I
Thank
completely
you.
agree with everything you just said, Chris.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was gold right there. Like I said, we had several more questions in terms of organization, society, implications to society, but looks like we will have to take that up on another time.
Yeah, let's do it again.
That again.
Part 2.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right.